I remember that evening with such clarity it feels as though time itself wanted me to keep it. My grandmother, Rose, sat in her old rocking chair on the veranda, and the summer wind played with the white curtains, carrying the scent of apples through the open doors. She was silent for longer than usual, as if preparing herself. Even before she spoke, I felt something inside me stir. This would not be an ordinary story. Grandmother had always been sparing with her past. Whenever I asked about my grandfather James, she would smile, shrug, or change the subject. But that evening her eyes glowed with something different. They carried the reflection of youth, and a shadow I had never seen before. She placed her thin hand over mine and said quietly, "Child, the time has come. I must tell you a story I've never fully told anyone." Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of what she carried inside for decades. "It's the story of James," she continued, "the man with whom I shared my life. The man who was both my joy and my greatest secret." Her words hung heavy between us. I expected tales of romance, laughter, maybe youthful passion. But her tone was different, lined with mystery. "You must understand," she finally whispered. "Our love was never simple. Within it lived something dangerous, something we both feared and cherished." I held my breath. That moment was the doorway into a story that would change me forever. Grandmother told me she was 17 when she first saw James. He was standing by the corner shop, she recalled, holding a book. The world bustled around him, children running, women selling fruit, the air thick with bread and coffee, but he seemed apart from it all, as if reading not just the book but the world itself. I pictured it vividly. A hot afternoon, my grandmother as a young girl with a basket of apples, and James, absorbed in a book, eyes dark and intent. It wasn't love at first sight, she insisted. It was something stranger. There was a restlessness in him, an unease, as if he carried a story he dared not share. That drew me more than his looks. The second time she saw him, he was in the same place, same posture, same quiet intensity. It was as though he was waiting, she said. "Not for someone but for me." I asked, "So you knew right then?" "No," she replied firmly. "It wasn't certainty. It was a warning." My heart whispered, "Careful, girl. This man will bring both happiness and pain." Her words gave me chills. This was no simple romance. It was the opening chord of something much darker. Grandmother described James in a way that made him come alive before me. His dark hair, always smoothed back as if he tried to tame unruly thoughts. His warm brown eyes flecked with gold, that caught the sun in strange ways. His rare smile, never frivolous, always true. "I worked in a small library," she said. "James began coming every day. He never borrowed books, never asked questions. He sat at the same table by the window, leafing through pages, glancing at me." Her heart had pounded so loudly she feared others would hear. She remembered scattering pencils one afternoon deliberately, just to pass his table. When he said my name, "Rose," he whispered it, as though afraid the syllable might shatter. I could see it. The silence of the library, the dust motes swirling, and two young souls circling each other with more silence than words. But even then, grandmother confessed, she sensed his visits had another purpose. "The books were a cover," she admitted. "He didn't come for stories. He came carrying his own." The turning point came unexpectedly. "One day," grandmother said, "he approached me not for a book but for an address." She hesitated, even in memory. "It was a warehouse on the edge of town. Nothing remarkable, just an abandoned place." But when he asked, his voice carried urgency. I felt as though he was handing me a key to something I should not open. She gave him the address anyway, scrawled on a slip of paper. When he took it, his gaze changed. In that moment, I became part of whatever secret he carried. She hadn't realized it then, but that choice bound her to James forever. "It wasn't romance," she said. "It was complicity." His silence made me his accomplice. I imagined her, a young girl behind a library desk, sliding a scrap of paper toward a boy whose life already belonged to something hidden. "He smiled when he left, thanking me," she said. And I knew then. I had stepped into a story that would never let me go. From then on, James's gestures carried meaning. He brought apples, not roses, laying them silently beside her on the desk. Apples of all kinds, red, green, sometimes bruised, grandmother said. It seemed ordinary, but each was a message. First she thought it sweet, his way of attention. Only later did she realize the apples were linked to that warehouse. They were more than gifts, they were signals. I didn't yet know how, she admitted. But I felt it. Their silences grew heavier. We could sit together without a word. Yet within that silence was more intimacy than any declaration. Listening, I felt the weight of it too. These weren't tokens of young love. They were codes in plain sight. James was never a simple man, grandmother concluded softly. And our love was never a simple love. It began with a secret, and it would end with one. Her words shivered through me. The story she was unfolding was not only about devotion. It was about the price of carrying another's hidden truth. Grandmother admitted she couldn't get that address out of her head. It echoed inside her thoughts, a whisper she could not silence. I tried to forget, she told me, but each time James returned to the library, his eyes reminded me. He never asked again, but the weight of it lingered between us. One evening she gathered her courage and went there. The warehouse stood at the edge of town, its walls peeling, windows empty, sockets, a rusted number hanging crookedly on the door. She said the place breathed with silence, like something long abandoned yet not entirely dead. I stood there trembling, she confessed. I didn't know whether to knock, to enter, or to flee. But I knew one thing, I was already involved even if I never stepped inside. She never opened the door. She returned home shaken, carrying more questions than answers. But the next day James appeared at the library again, placing an apple on her desk as usual. Only this one was different, it had a single bite taken out of it. When I saw that, she whispered, I knew he had been there. And he knew I had too. I asked her if that meant he had been watching her. She didn't answer directly. James always knew more than he spoke, she said instead. She described the library that day. James sat across from her, the bitten apple lying between them like a challenge. I asked why, she told me. Why leave it half-eaten? His reply was simple, but it rattled her. Because you two have taken a bite of the secret. From that moment their connection shifted. He stopped speaking of trivial things. Instead he asked her strange questions. Can you keep silence? Do you trust your feelings more than words? Would you hold something dangerous if it meant protecting me? Each question drew her deeper into his shadowed world. I didn't realize then, she said, that I was being tested. And every answer I gave bound me closer to him. At that time rumors swirled around town. People whispered of gatherings on the outskirts, men meeting in abandoned houses, deals struck under cover of night. I didn't know what was truth, grandmother admitted. But each time I heard talk of those from the warehouse, my heart clenched. Because I knew James was among them. He left her a note one evening tucked into a book. Just 3 words. Keep it hidden. She told me she slid the note into a novel no one ever borrowed. It felt like I was part of a game with rules I didn't understand. Yet I played because I couldn't bear the thought of stepping away. I imagined her young hands clutching the slip of paper, the weight of it greater than its size. Love had become inseparable from secrecy. That was when I realized, she said, that love and danger had become one. Soon their meetings moved beyond the library. Not in daylight, never in crowds. James invited her to walk only at night, when the town slept. We wandered empty streets, she recalled, and his silence always lasted longer than his words. But I understood more in those silences than in any conversation. One evening, he stopped near an abandoned factory. He turned to her and said, "Whatever you hear, you must keep." She nodded without knowing what he meant. And then for the first time he hinted at the truth. He told me that the warehouse wasn't just storage, she explained. It was where people gathered, people who could not trust the world outside. Her voice dropped when she told me this. I was terrified, but I also realized that night he had opened a door into his world, and I had stepped inside. Listening, I understood. Their love was more than affection. It was complicity, bound up with secrets that could never be spoken aloud. After that night, grandmother noticed a change in him. James seemed more cautious. His eyes flickered toward doors, his steps slowed at corners. But beside her he softened. When he placed an apple before me, it was as if the world stilled, she said. Finally, she asked the question that had been building in her chest. Who are you really? His reply was both simple and devastating. Someone who can never tell the whole truth. She told me those words became her burden. I understood then, she said, that I would never truly know him. Yet I also knew I could not let him go. James was mystery and love entwined, and her devotion grew in the space between what he revealed and what he kept locked away. Grandmother told me that the first months of their secret meetings felt like living in two parallel worlds. By day she was the quiet librarian, arranging books, answering polite questions. By night she walked the empty streets with James, the air between them filled with unspoken promises and unspoken fears. And then he vanished. He didn't come to the library, she recalled. There was no apple on the desk, no glance from across the room. Just absence. Days stretched into weeks. She sat at her desk, eyes drawn to the window, waiting for a silhouette that never appeared. I began to think I had dreamed him. That James was an invention of my own longing. Then one evening she found a plain envelope on her table. No name, no seal, just her trembling fingers tearing it open. Inside were 7 words. I will return. Guard my secret always. She pressed the letter to her chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to breathe life back into her heart. That was the beginning of their correspondence. Letters that became her only bridge to him. The letters arrived irregularly, as unpredictable as the wind. Sometimes a week apart, sometimes months of silence. They weren't stories, Grandmother explained. They were fragments, as though written in haste, stolen moments. One note said, "Tonight I saw the stars, they were your eyes." Another, "Don't ask where I am. Only believe." A third contained nothing but a small sketch of an apple with a heart carved in its center. She hid them carefully, slipping them between book pages no one borrowed. Every word was dangerous, she said. If someone else saw them, they would know James was part of something secret. Nights became rituals. She would light her lamp, unfold the fragile pages, and read them again and again. The words were scarce, but they held her. Those scraps of paper were more alive to me than anything else, she confessed. They were breath itself. By then the town was buzzing with rumors. Men gathering in the dark, whispers of clandestine deals, strange figures entering warehouses on the outskirts. Each time I overheard talk of those from the warehouse, Grandmother said, my heart seized. Because I knew James was one of them. And yet he kept writing. His letters grew heavier. I must do things others will never understand. But you are my reason. Another. I fear someday I won't return. Keep my name safe. Grandmother's voice faltered as she recalled them. Every letter was both a vow and a farewell. Each time I opened one I wondered, will this be the last? I could feel the tension in her words. Love had turned into waiting. Waiting had turned into fear. And still she clung to him. The heart, she said softly, does not ask permission from the mind. Then the letters stopped. A week passed. Then another. Then months. Grandmother said the silence was worse than any rumor, any shadow. I thought it was over, she admitted. That he had been taken. That I had lost him. But one night, she heard a gentle knock at her window. She opened it and there he stood. James, pale, exhausted but alive. Rain dripped from his coat. His eyes carried both pain and relief. We didn't speak, she whispered. We just stood holding each other. His hands were cold but they were real. And that was enough. Before he left, he pressed another envelope into her hand. Do not open it, he told her. Not unless I disappear forever. Then he vanished into the darkness once more. She kept that letter sealed, hidden in the deepest drawer. I never opened it, she admitted, because some words once spoken can never be silenced. Life resumed, at least on the surface. Rose worked at the library, smiled when spoken to, carried out the motions of ordinary days. But inside everything was different. I lived in expectation, she said. Every apple in the market seemed a sign. Every sound at night made me hope it was him. But whispers followed her. Neighbors noticed her distraction, her weariness. Questions came. Why she always looked so far away, why she seemed burdened. She had no answer she could give. Because his secret had become my own, she explained. Silence was the only shield we had. It was then she learned the hardest truth. That love is not peace. It is a war fought in the heart. A war to hold on when everything else demands you let go. I kept waiting, she told me, her voice trembling. But I never knew which would come first, his return or the news that he was gone forever. Grandmother told me James returned unexpectedly, not by letter, not by whispered signal, but in the broad light of day. She was at the library desk when he walked in. Her hands froze, nearly dropping the books she carried. He looked different, she said. Older. Harder. There was a shadow in his eyes I hadn't seen before. He did not go to his usual seat by the window. Instead, he came directly to her desk and placed an apple in front of her. But this apple was carved. Into its skin was etched a small star. I knew it meant something, she confessed. But he didn't explain. He only whispered, "I'm staying." No one else in the library noticed anything unusual, but to her it was as though the air had shifted. James was back, but not the same. His silence was heavier now, weighted with what he had seen, what he carried. I wanted to demand answers, grandmother said. But his eyes told me not to ask. And so I obeyed, because loving him meant trusting what he could not say. Their meetings resumed, but they were no longer carefree. James rarely laughed anymore, grandmother said. He watched the door, the windows, the shadows. It was as though danger walked beside him at all times. Yet even with this vigilance, he still came to her. Each visit he would slip her a note, short, enigmatic. Once, between the pages of a book, she found just 2 words. Don't fear. She carried that scrap with her everywhere. A fragile shield against the world. But fear grew anyway, she admitted. The town whispered louder. Some swore they had seen James among the men at the warehouse. Others warned me without words, just with their stares. She never asked him outright. Because if he admitted it, the truth might destroy what we had. I chose not knowing so that I could go on loving him. Her voice trembled at this confession. Love, for her, had become the art of protecting silence. One day James brought her something new. A small box wrapped in dark cloth. He placed it in her hands with no ceremony, his expression grave. I thought it was a gift, grandmother remembered. But he said only, "Hide it. Don't open it." The box was heavier than it looked. She tucked it under her bed, yet its weight pressed on her every night. I dreamt of it burning, she confessed, as though it pulsed with some hidden fire. James gave her no explanation, only one warning. If something happens to me, this will prove the truth exists. From that moment, she was not just his confidant but his guardian. It frightened me, she said, but it also bound us. That box was the seal of our bond. I could no longer separate love from secrecy. Her hands trembled as she described it, as though even decades later, she still felt the weight of what she had once hidden. The burden of the box grew heavier with each passing day. I lived in 2 worlds, grandmother said. By day the librarian, polite and composed. By night a girl lying awake, listening for footsteps, guarding a secret I did not understand. James returned only sparingly, but always asked the same question. Do you still keep it? She would nod, and only then would he breathe easier, his shoulders unclenching for a moment. Our love, she explained, was not in declarations or embraces. It was in silence, in the trust that I would carry what he gave me without asking. I imagined her lying awake, the box beneath her bed like a second heartbeat in the dark. She feared discovery. She feared opening it. But most of all, she feared losing him to whatever darkness it contained. Love became indistinguishable from conspiracy, she told me. And yet, that was what made it unbreakable. Then came the night when James arrived trembling. His face was drawn, his hands unsteady. He sat beside her and whispered, I may not be here much longer. But believe me, this has meaning. Grandmother said she felt panic rise like fire. She wanted to cry, to demand the truth, to hold him until morning. But instead she simply clasped his hand. Because I knew, she said, that no words could save us from what was coming. Before he left, he placed another apple in her hand. But this one was different. It was stained with dark ink, patterns drawn across its skin. I never knew what it meant, she admitted. Perhaps a warning. Perhaps a farewell. After that night, he vanished once more. And Rose was left alone, with the letters, the sealed box, and the silence that grew louder with each passing day. Grandmother told me that after James vanished, her life lost its rhythm. Days bled into one another. Quiet mornings at the library, polite conversations with neighbors, the shuffle of pages. But beneath it all pulsed a hollow ache. I lived, she said. But really I only waited. The box beneath her bed became unbearable. Wrapped in its dark cloth, it seemed alive, pressing against her thoughts. Sometimes I imagined it breathing, she confessed, as though it carried a second heart, his heart. One afternoon there came a knock at her door. Firm, deliberate. On the step stood a tall man in a gray coat, his features sharp, his eyes colder than winter. He asked her a single question. Did she know James? I said no, she told me. Though my heart pounded so loudly I feared he'd hear the lie. The man studied her face, eyes searching for cracks. Then without a word, he turned and walked away. But his presence left the air heavy, and she knew. James's secret was larger than she had ever imagined. That night she sat awake until dawn, staring at the box, clutching James's letters. For the first time she understood. Her love was not only devotion, it was fear. Weeks passed. Silence pressed harder each day. Rose awoke at every sound, convinced it was James, or the men who hunted him. I felt trapped between longing and dread, she said. Then one rainy evening a knock came, not at the door but the window. She opened it and there he was. James. His coat soaked through, his face pale, but his eyes alive with desperate fire. He didn't greet me, she recalled. He just seized my hand and whispered, "Don't open the box. No matter what happens." His voice carried no plea, only command. They stood together in silence. She felt his trembling hand, smelled the rain on his skin. She wanted to ask, "Who are you really? What is this secret worth more than us?" But love held her tongue. Before leaving, he handed her a sealed envelope. "Open it only if I am gone forever." Grandmother told me she never broke its seal. I couldn't, she said, because I feared it held goodbye. James never returned. Grandmother waited days, months, years. She carried on with life, but inside she lived in suspension, caught between presence and absence. I thought perhaps he had died, she admitted, or disappeared into the shadows of that warehouse world. But she never let go. She read and reread his old letters, clutching them until the paper softened with her touch. Every word kept him alive, she said. If I let go, I would lose him twice. Neighbors saw only the surface. The quiet librarian, later the woman who married, who bore children, who cooked and worked. But beneath that life, she confessed, James lived still. In every apple one picked, in every silence I carried. The box remained under her bed, the envelope tucked beside it. She never opened either. Because once I did, she said, the truth would become unbearable. And faith was all I had left. Her voice faltered as she told me this. Love is sometimes the choice to believe what cannot be proven. Without that choice, I would not have survived. By then I could no longer keep from asking. The weight of the story pressed on me. Grandmother, I whispered. What was inside the box? Did you ever look? She was silent a long time. Her gaze seemed to drift past me, into years I could never touch. Then she smiled faintly with sorrow at its edges. You want the truth? She asked. I nodded. Her answer was simple and devastating. I never opened it. Not once. James asked me not to, and his request became my vow. I felt torn between disappointment and awe. She had lived her whole life beside a mystery. And the last letter? I asked. The one he gave you? She touched my hand gently. That too remained sealed. Because I knew whatever words lay inside, they would close the story. And I was not ready for it to end. Her choice was clear. Mystery over certainty, faith over fact. Some secrets, she said, are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be carried. She ended her story with a whisper. James was my love and my secret. I never fully knew who he was. But I knew who he was to me. Her eyes shone with a light that came not from the present, but from decades ago. Even in her old age, I could see the girl she had once been, the one who watched him read by the shop, who accepted the apples he laid on her desk, who held the box she never opened. The box remained untouched, the final letter sealed. And in that restraint lay the essence of their love. I learned, she told me, that love doesn't always give answers. Sometimes it leaves questions that sustain you all your life. I sat beside her, feeling the weight of those words settle into me. Their love had no neat ending, no final chapter. But perhaps that was why it endured, unfinished, eternal. Remember this, child, she said softly. Real love doesn't end. It lingers in silence, in secrets, in the hearts that keep it alive. Her voice faded, but the story remained alive within me. And I knew I would carry it too, just as she had carried James.